Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Malooly. I'm an Alumni Relations Executive at Trinity Development and Alumni, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to today's Inspiring Ideas Trinity webinar. This is the final webinar in our series for the year 2020, but don't worry, we'll be back with a range of new topics and speakers in the new year. Today's webinar is being hosted by the Trinity Business Alumni, Trinity's largest alumni affinity group, who regularly organize high-quality events such as this with the very best of speakers. I want to thank President of the Trinity Business Alumni, Liam Booth, for making today a reality, as well as the work of all of the other committee members. Today, I'm delighted to welcome our host, Conor Killeen, Chairman of Key Capital, as well as our amazing three panelists, Clodagh Edwards, Tom Lyons, and Ian Kehoe, who you will hear more about shortly. Our panel will be speaking about the pace of change in media consumption and production post-COVID-19. Before we get started, I'd just like to quickly run through a few technical items. For those of you who are joining us on Zoom, you can view in full screen mode on the top right corner. You can adjust your audio settings on the bottom left. You can leave the session whenever you need to on the bottom right. And finally, we encourage you to ask questions using the Q&A button in the bottom middle of the screen. And we encourage you to do that throughout the hour. For those of you who are viewing on YouTube Live today, you can mute and unmute using the small speaker button circled in red on the screen. And if you want to share the webinar, you can do so by clicking the share link on the right. To subscribe to our channel, you can click the red subscribe button. And again, we'd love to hear from you. So please submit your questions or comments in the chat and we can pass those on. The discussion today will last around 50 minutes, including Q&A from the audience interwoven into the conversation throughout. Please do send in your questions as they occur to you, because we love nothing more than that audience panel interaction. And we hope to wrap up by around 2 p.m. Irish time. And now I'd like to introduce our host for today, Conor Killeen. Conor, Chairman, established Key Capital in 2001. Prior to the establishment of Key Capital, he was Global Head of Equities and a member of the Executive Committee of Dresdner Kleinwort. Before this, he held senior product and management positions at UBS and Schroders. Conor has worked on numerous high-profile IPOs, secondary share offerings, and convertible issues. In addition to raising over €100 billion of equity for companies and governments, Conor has significant experience in M&A and starting a business. In the last 20 years, Key Capital have developed a business which provides corporate finance and investment and wealth management services to Irish and international clients. Conor is a member of the Provost Council at Trinity and read economics here in the Trinity College. Conor, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Michael. And thank you everybody for attending. Thanks to Liam Booth, indeed, echo that, and the Trinity Business Alumni for inviting this panel to discuss an interesting and important subject. I'd like to introduce our panelists, and then we'll flow from that into maybe a discussion about how the pandemic has affected their specific business areas. And from there, hopefully we'll be able to respond to some of your questions and also have a conversation around this whole area. And it's a vast area. We all recognize that. So we're not going to cover as much as we'd all love to. But Tom Lyons is the chief executive of the Currency. He's also the co-founder of that business 2 years ago. And it's a new subscription-based publication. It's been almost designed with the pandemic in mind, you could nearly say. It breaks stories on business and current affairs, politics, finance, government matters. It hosts podcasts and frequently sets the agenda in Ireland on those subjects. Tom has several awards going back many years for the Business Post, has worked there, at the Irish Times, Independent News and Media, even at News Talk. And he has those awards from News Brands and NNI. Clodagh Edwards is the chief executive of Image Publications since 2015, where she and colleagues have reinvented an iconic publisher into a modern multi-platform media business. She has already undergone quite a number of challenged periods, be it the intervention of the internet on publishing or the great financial crisis. So we were talking during the week, and we I imagine that perhaps you've been well conditioned for the pandemic, and we'll hear how Image responded and the speed and decisiveness with which that business has responded to this new challenge. Ian Kyo is highly energetic, multi-platform, multidisciplined journalist of great standing, many credits and awards to his name. I first encountered Ian as the, I think, then youngest editor of a national broadsheet at the Sunday Business Post. But he's a lot of credits in TV as well. Ian's the deputy chairman of RTE, and in that capacity, he's going to be able to offer a perspective across the industry as a whole. So there are a team, and as I said, there's a lot of areas in this subject that I'd be delighted if people felt they wanted to address specific areas. But I'd also, I think from the discussion, we'll also get plenty of ammunition for engagement. So Tom, I might start with you and ask you how it felt to be the chief executive and a major contributor to a subscription-based current affairs and business, principally business platform when this all came to be.
Yeah, well, it felt like we were on a really strong run. You know, we'd launched in September 2019, and now we were into March of this year, and we were well ahead of our expectations in terms of subscriber growth, in terms of revenue, and we had the different channels, our different revenue channels were all growing. So when this started in March, you know, my initial reaction was somewhat like, God, I wish we had had more Friday evenings having pints instead of working, because we're going to miss them for the next short while. But very quickly, you could see that this is going to be something that's going to impact our business for at least 12 months, possibly 18 months. So we looked at the different components of the business, and we realized that, like, you know, that we had an events arm of the business, that wasn't going to progress any further. We had an ancillary revenue type business, which was kind of doing some bespoke content for corporates. And we could see that's a business that isn't going to go further. So really drove us back to our core, which is producing, you know, unique journalism. And it brought us back to saying, look, we've got to go deeper. We've got to do strong investigations. We've got to break original stories and become that focal point for Irish business where we can get them talking, particularly when they're all working at home. Usually they'd be picking up the gossip over lunch, bumping into people at the boardroom table. That's how people, like, the people pick up news from the media, but they also pick it up from interacting with other people. So we realized that, like, we need to get that talkability factor and focus only on one part of our business, which is that core part of it. And we also realized, I think, Connor, like, we'd had a great start with the corporate side of the business. You know, we were well on our way. You know, we'd 500 or 600 corporate subscribers very, very quickly. Wow. And that stopped in its entirety, pretty much. So we realized, look, this is going to become a business. We'd seen it as maybe being 50-50 between an individual and a business. It's now 80-20. It's all individuals, and they way more individuals, and that they're engaging with the product, and they're quite sticky with the product. So we changed the business model. We were lucky that, like, remote wasn't that hard. Technology allows you to do that. We weren't reliant on, you know, printing or news agents being open or anything like that. So that definitely played to our strengths. We did do a cost review. We decided not to cut any costs. The reason we did that was we felt that we were pretty lean anyway, and that it would be better to try and keep the team's morale high by not cutting costs, not cutting wages. We were due to pay them a bonus when we had a certain membership number over the summer. Yeah. Again, we could easily have said, let's not do that. But we felt we should pay it because we'd hit that number, and that we needed to try and, you know, invest in the team and try and encourage them, because it was discouraging. You know, like one of the reasons people go into journalism, it's not just about the money. certainly not about the money. It's about the camaraderie, the being close to the action, the crack. And that has definitely left the business. And I think if you saw Frank Fitzgibbon, who recently stepped down as the editor of the Sunday Times, one of the things he said was he wasn't having as much fun anymore. So you've just got to be conscious of that, like leading the business within, just conscious that the things that like where we used to be the sort of the escape valves and the fun isn't there. So we need to try and, as much as we can, like stay in touch with the team, encourage them, and really allow them to produce content that they're proud of. And hopefully that'll be the reward that'll keep the team together through this period.
So if you just take the content point for a sec, have you been able to get access that maybe you mightn't have been able to get before, or has that been, has there been any change in that in terms of, because you've generated some pretty impressive interviews and connections, and aside from the investigative stuff?
Well, I think there's two, like I miss the type of stories you get from bumping into somebody, or from getting 3 to 4 pints into them and getting the real story out of them. That isn't happening anymore. On the other hand, Connor, I do think that there's like a lot of business people and entrepreneurs who are very conscious that they need to be telling their stories more. So in some ways it's been easier because they're available, and they're conscious that, look, they need to be trying to talk to their customers, talk to their investors, talk to their team, their employees. So that's definitely played to our strengths, which is the long reads and doing these kind of in-depth interviews. But I definitely do think that like the interviewing someone over a Zoom call is not the same as spending a bit of time with them, particularly a bit of time that happens maybe after you've finished the formal interview and you start moving towards the, either let's have a drink afterwards or have a coffee or whatever that might be. Like that's something that, I'd be concerned about in journalism, that like, those kind of unique stories, some of those really unique stories maybe aren't coming out because of that.
Yeah, and we will come back to network and how you keep it fresh and maintain that net, that whole web of relationships that you have when you can't just accidentally bump into people. We'll come back to that a little bit, but maybe before we do, Claude, I'd like, you and I've spoken, and I'm intrigued by Image Publications because you're a very much broader business than I imagined. A and B, you've been through a couple of versions of redesigning yourself to accommodate the world as it then turns out to be. And I think it'd be interesting for people to hear, what your business is, what it was, and maybe what it is, and perhaps even what it might be.
Yeah. Well, I suppose, yes, we have been through many iterations, thanks to, the introduction of digital and the demise of print. But like, there's no disputing the devastating impact COVID-19 had on our business. We were up against lockdown restrictions, advertising, in pause, brands not spending. So what we did was we moved everybody online, and then we transitioned our entire events team. And we the famous word right now, pivot, but we pivoted them online. And what we've done is we've done 18 events, since virtually. We have increased our attendees by 36% versus our live events. We won a Digital Media Awards there last month, took silver place for best collaboration with On Post with Or the media agency. So we've had good successes there, but it has been a very testing and challenging time. We did have to restructure the business. Cara Magazine is on hiatus and will remain in that space for quite some period. There is no indication of when that will come back. And so the opportunities we took from it was we had casualties from COVID, live events, sponsorship, ticket sales, streams of revenue. Print has always been kind of in that declining space, but we actually paused our print, and what we did was we took a step back and said, right, what are we going to do with print? And we brought out an interiors annual, Image Interiors and Living. That's one sector that has done really well throughout.
Okay.
So on our female image.ie, business, women, beauty, actually interiors, property and homes were the three areas that were spiking the whole way through the summer. So we know that we were all at home doing up our houses and our gardens and whatnot. It was pretty reflective of it. But we had to, restructure the team, and being remote. I think Tom makes such a good point about the challenge of, good stories, and particularly over the last 4 to 6 weeks, our editors, they go out into the world and they have conversations, and they bring that back and they distill it through content for our audience. And one of the big challenges, and I've really only noticed it in the last 4 to 6 weeks, is my editorial team, who are my, the genius ideas and the light bulb moments, and they've bumped into this person and whatnot. There is nothing happening out there. So they're really struggling. And personally, I feel it's quite hard to motivate them. I remember lockdown 1. My light bulb moments are always in the car. And it used to be on my commute, that hour and a half, Castleknock to Dunleary, or in the bath. I used to drive my 2K thinking, how am I going to move this? But that is a big challenge in it. And it's trying to cut through the noise of COVID, Trump, take away food from restaurants, and have some really good content. Our virtual events have worked really good in that space, because it's where our audience is at, and we've been able to provide them with topics they're interested in, be it like self-care series. We did an 8-part series touching on nutrition, money, mind, health, all those areas. That's worked. We did a big piece with On Post, Authors Evening, Patrick Frayne, and all of that has worked. But it's
and Clodagh, on the brand side you mentioned there, I mean, how have you noticed any change in the way some of the key client brands that you operate with are talking to their target market through you?
Yeah, well, lockdown 1 was interesting. Nobody wanted to be seen to be profiteering from it. So even the supermarkets were like, oh God, okay, well, we're not going to do anything. Nobody wanted to be profiteering. The pharmaceuticals were even pulling back from their beauty offering, which we would have had a lot of partnerships with the likes of Boots, Macaulay's, all those different pharmaceuticals. Everyone went into, oh God, I don't want to be seen to be making money. And on the other hand, there was brands going, I have no bloody money. So everything just kind of went into stop, bar the government were pummeling out these public service ads, which unfortunately Image Media didn't actually get any of those.
Ian got all of that.
And so now what we see is, so we saw this complete decline, everything, it was like everyone went into hibernation. Then July came and everyone started to feel better. We got out of lockdown and people started spending again. You could see all the work that was put out to brands and briefs and pitches all started coming in. Really, really good. We started moving in a good trajectory. And then lockdown came again and everyone scurries back in, and brands put their money back in their pockets. We're not sure where we're going. And now, and you can see with Christmas, so brands are keen to engage with people, but only if they can be sensitive to the messaging. Hence why Woodies and Super Value, and we want to, paint the garden gate for Granny, and we want to see Granda coming home at Christmas. Outside of that, brands certainly aren't veering into any space that looks like they're profiteering or it's not in line with the temperature and the mood.
I'm with you. Very interesting. Ian, we'd be. I mean, obviously, RTE have a mission to educate and entertain and inform, and they, I don't think they probably get maybe as much credit as they deserve in that area. We're getting a lot of noise about behavior of staff, and we're we do know that your numbers have been a lot better than you were expecting 6 or 8 months ago. Tell us what's been going on up there over the last 6 or 8 months. I mean, it must have been an interesting ride.
Well, it has been, Conor. And it's interesting to have that sort of non-executive and yet a very involved role with a company in addition to what I do with the currency. Like when we were, this time last year, RTE announced a new strategic review of what it wanted to do. Was cost cutting, it was, shutting down different things, trying to rationalize to get back on a sustainable path. And that was in progress. January, February, March was in progress. And this year we were due to have a deficit. You have visibility on your numbers a long time out from the license fee and from commercial revenue. It was due to generate a deficit. And we had to reassess all of those numbers in March when the first lockdown happened and the impact of this began to really crystallize. And it was devastating in March and April, absolutely devastating. So if you take the two areas where we get all of the money, one, commercial income just collapsed. Any person, and Claudia will have seen it, all of the brands, just the immediate response in March and April was not to spend any money to see what's going to happen. So commercial revenues collapsed. In addition, actually, the license fee also suffered heavily. So it was a combination of people were worried about their finances, but also an awful lot of people still go to the local post office to pay their license fee. And they weren't going out, they were afraid to go in. So the license fee collapsed. So we reassessed all of those numbers and we were projecting a massive deficit for 2020. What was really interesting at the same time, and at the same time, RTE invested heavily in programming. It invested really heavily. So it took that decision, and that was like what Tom said, what we did at the currency, we invested in content, but RTE invested in programming. So we invested in education. So you'll have seen the Homeschool Hub series, fully funded by RTE, but to provide an educational outlet for people. You'll have seen all of the effort that went into, promoting businesses and the new series on radio and television about businesses, and also the general public health message. And the response to all of this was a massive influx of listeners and viewers and readers across the three main platforms, across television, radio, and online. And people gravitated towards the websites and the news broadcasts that they could trust. So they moved away from Facebook. They moved away from Twitter. Trust in those outlets went down, and they gravitated towards outlets that they could trust. So the viewers came back in. And since that happened, the numbers in RTE from both the license fee and also in relation to commercial advertising have completely rebounded. So it's a positive story for this year. I saw reports, I don't want to get into what numbers are going to be for 2020, but certainly from a point of view of where we could have been looking at a 30 million euro deficit, now it will be break even at worst.
That's great. I mean,
but it was that. Now, that said, and I have to stress two things around those numbers, Connor. Number one, RTE benefited sufficiently from the wage subsidy scheme, so that helped. And an awful lot of costs, I think 10 to 12 million, have been pushed into next year. So things like, the Olympics and an awful lot of one-off events that would have been factored in 2020.
But you would have seen that in March, April too, I guess.
Yeah, you would, but there has been a dramatic reversal. And I do think it comes back to that, who do people trust? And we've seen it in the currency as well. I think if you look at the data, and it's not just in Ireland, it's right across Europe. People have pivoted away, to use that phrase, they've pivoted away from social media for their news feeds. Yeah. They're now going back to trust it. And RTE has been a big beneficiary, and there's been an awful lot of work to get there. And it's been very difficult to run radio stations and TV stations half remotely. But certainly the financial picture has improved beyond belief over the last number of months.
Yeah. And since you raised it, there's a question here for Claudia. What are other publishers doing that you think works or admire?
So I guess I was very impressed with I really liked the new Irish Tackler supplement in the Sunday Business Post. It came out last month. I guess I've always looked outside of Ireland for inspiration in terms of image media. you know, we were lucky years ago to kind of build our website before we had any kind of demand. We did it as a brand piece. We weren't necessarily looking for revenue, et cetera, et cetera. We had that in place. But looking outside, I suppose, you know, in terms of who I admire, Condé Nast have done a lot of amazing things. I did a course in Yale a few years ago, and it was in Yale, and we were there with, you know, you had publishers, editors from Hong Kong, Harper's Bazaar, Australia, all these different people, and we were all finding the same different struggles, and that was print and advertising in decline. And it was there that I learned all about Wired and what they did with the branded content studio. And their branded content studio basically, you know, gave brands a solution to have their advertising or their native articles produced 360 as opposed to just in a magazine. And so we took that back to Image, and we did that. We created our branded content studio in 2017. And that has proven a huge success. It's on the back of that we were able to pivot our virtual events. It's on the back of that we have secured partnerships throughout the summer from people like Sky, Yoplait, OnPost, Pantene, all these different brands. So it's in that creative content studio. So I always tend to look outside of Ireland. That's where I brought that piece back. And I suppose what they're doing now in Condé is they're trying to figure out, as most media publishers are, how do we make money while magazines are in decline? And, you know, the Wired piece, they're doing things like offering €50 subscription boxes to their subscribers,
Right.
things like that. So from my perspective, I do tend to look outside of Ireland.
Yeah.
And where I bring a lot of our ideas to life here.
Well, there's an outside Ireland team coming through here, and some of the questions, particularly around you know, Facebook and YouTube and other social media competitive pressures, and whether they are publishers or not publishers, whether they you know, whether we are as a European hub for these businesses, you know, in a position to actually influence whether they should be, you know, press ganged into, you know, taking a bit more responsibility. Tom, I wonder what your views are on that.
Well, I do think, you know, like as a startup, you know, I look at there's not very much support for Irish media businesses. I mean, we were lucky that we got a local enterprise office grant, which was very helpful to us. But I would compare that to the multinationals and the vulture funds, which we write quite a lot about in the currency. And I see, you know, companies like, you know, major investment banks paying €254 in tax whilst doing deals worth hundreds of millions. And I kind of then look at our tax bill and how much we paid this year. And, you know, both myself and Ian are very happy to pay tax because we think it contributes towards society. And we think that that's, you know, it's one of those things that, like, if you're able to pay it, you should pay it. But then we see how the multinationals and the investment funds, the state bends over backwards to benefit them. Yet they're companies who will come and go. You know, if you look at, say, a brand like Image magazine, you know, that's been around since 1984, I think. You know, it's been very consistent employer over that period of time. Some of these multinationals will come here and then they're going to leave here. So there's definitely, I think that they've got huge tax advantages. They get way more grants than we ever possibly could. And then you tie in that fact that, like, you know, if we get embroiled in some, you know, minor defamation action with somebody, you can be into €250,000, €1 million bill quite quickly. You know, the very minimum that people are looking to settle, you know, a defamation action is, you know, somewhere between 10 and 50,000 euros. If you are posting something on Facebook or Twitter, which could be, you know, exposing somebody's private life, it could be using stolen information, it could be encouraging them to take risks, it could be anti-science, all this type of stuff. It could be stuff like Donald Trump saying, you know, like anti-democracy type stuff. There's very few checks and balances, and that they're on, like, they have a massive advantage versus us. But they don't have to worry about this. They just say, oh, sure, that's not us. I'd love to be able to say that, like, that's not me, that's my journalists.
Yeah. Yeah. But actually, I mean, how do you think we are in a fairly strong position to influence these matters, and what have politicians in the past promised to deal with the anti-defamation laws and to maybe should be taking a step to go a bit braver and, incorporate, some of these points into the legislation, and, how do you go about getting it done? I mean, there is a commission, I know, Future Media Commission. Is that going to do it, Tom?
Well, there's been talk about reforming defamation for 10 years, Connor. And the reality is, if I went over to your office and I broke your arm with a baseball bat, I'd probably end up having to pay you 20 grand. If I wrote some article that you didn't like or that you perceived as a criticism, you could take me down the High Court and we could be into €1 million before you know it.
Right.
So there's there's definitely like that unfairness there, and that like the government should be looking at placing caps on payouts and making it easier for ordinary people to take these court cases. Like, you have to be wealthy to take on the media. An ordinary citizen should be able to do it, and just give us a bit more certainty around what type of payouts we're going to face. And in terms of setting up a commission, you're kind of like, could you not do what you've already, just do what you've committed to do?
Yeah.
Reforming defamation, and make that the priority rather than let's set up another talking shop, which is going to take a year or two to get to. And then before you know it, we're on to the next government and nothing gets done.
Ian.
Yeah, I might just come in. I mean, just on the defamation piece, the system doesn't work. And I'm not just saying that from a point of view of, oh, it's inhibiting me or Tom or what we do. It is rigged in favor, and I use that phrase knowingly, but it is rigged in favor of the wealthy. A normal person cannot take a defamation case in this country because if you lose, you're on the hook for the costs, and it could bankrupt you. And because it's a jury trial by nature, and because it's in the High Court, and I know they've talked about circuit court, but all of the defamation is largely taking place in the High Court. A normal person cannot afford to take a defamation case. It is only the purview of the rich and the wealthy to take people to the High Court. So it doesn't serve any purpose whatsoever. And it also, I mean, the costs associated with defending, and you know this as well, Connor, the costs associated with defending a case in the High Court are prohibitive. And it forces editors and chairmen and CEOs to make secret settlements with people early, even when the legal advice is you haven't done anything wrong. Now, the commission that Tom touched upon, it's interesting because that commission was initially, and it's chaired by Brian McCraw, the former president of DCU, but was initially set up to look at the funding model for RTE. That's what it got set up last year for, was to look at the funding model for RTE, because the license fee model is broken. You can be watching, you don't need a license fee if you watch RTE on your laptop, for example. It's only if you have a physical television in your house. So it's not even fit for purpose anymore. As a result of the program for government negotiations, it was expanded to look at the entire media. Now, we still don't know whether they're going to be looking at Facebook, that we just spoke about, or Google or Twitter or any of these people. And hopefully it will, because they might claim they're not publishers, but they are publishers. They are publishers. They're not platforms, they're publishers. Hopefully it will look at that. I wonder, it's an immense body of work, and I see what Tom is saying, it's an immense body of work to have a look at the entire media industry and come back with recommendations. But hopefully we've done a short, sharp way, and we'll come back with some reasonable proposals about how you fund the industry. I don't think it's necessarily about trying to come up with state subsidies. I think it's about trying to level the playing field.
Yeah, that'd be
and
enough,
it's interesting about that digital media space, right? And a couple of years ago, everyone in media rushed towards digital. Digital was the problem, so it was automatically seen as the solution. And it was seen as the panacea for all of the issues, declining circulation, all of declining advertising, it's digital. Unfortunately, like Google and Facebook are getting 95% of all the digital ad revenues in this country. And that's mirrored across Europe.
Okay, thank you for that. Clodagh, there's a question in here. Actually, before we get onto it, I might just ask you whether image has ever been taken through the High Court process.
No.
No, yeah, nice. Keep it that way, honestly. I'm sure you will. The question is, after consumers are consuming everything online for the last few months, do you think this is from Andrea Lasmar, do you think we will see a reduction of time spent online? Is this overexposure to online going to affect the future of the business that you're all doing? I think is the sub. So are we going to see people reverting probably to print media? I think might be implicit in that.
Yeah, it's interesting watching behavior, and over the summer, absolutely, that's where we saw this, you know, the traffic doubled, everybody was online, everybody on social. I think a lot of people are kind of winding off social media at the minute. I mean, we don't see too many selfies anymore. Always a good indication. We used to be thronged with them, but people aren't out to take them. And what we have noticed is this renaissance with print. So, you know, where print was once at the start of this year, we certainly wouldn't have been hugely considering, you know, in terms of revamping our print structure, but it has enabled us with our annuals to put them out. And we, you know, the online subscription for our annuals, the first 2 days there was 100 in. It was super to see. I regularly engage with Newspread and talk to the news agents about behaviour. So while the newsstands have been shrinking over the years, and they've gone, some have disappeared.
Yeah.
What the feedback is people are now signing up to newspapers to be delivered to the house and magazines. So there is a shift in behavior. People do want that tactical magazine coming through. They want time to sit and read with it. So I think that will it impact our business? Our business, in March, we had to rip up our budget. So 33% has gone with events. We would have been looking at 25% coming from print and 40% from digital. Now, we are looking at 40% from print and 60% from digital. So the thing about it is, COVID's not gone away. We're still in learning behavior mode, but I do feel that that print will actually see a nice little, you know, boom, if for want of a better word, and that is what we're experiencing. Our advertising on print for both our annuals is increased, and it's doing well. So
interesting. Thank you for that. Question here specifically for you, Tom. Why does the currency not allow monthly subscriptions?
We do. Monthly and annual. So the monthly is 25 euros a month, and the annual is 200 euros introductory price, which goes to 250. So we do both. We don't allow payments for individual stories, which is something that we regularly get asked for. Yeah. And the reason we don't do that, Connor, is that the amount of like the customer service and the issues around managing a micropayment, it's just not worth our time getting €1 off you or say even €2 off you to read an article. So we put that introductory €5 offer there. So if there is just an article that you really want to read, you can sign up on that
always sign up for
and then cancel it straight afterwards.
Okay, well that answers Michael's question. Here's from Jim Bracken. Surely Ireland cannot influence the large online media giants. This is a matter for the EU rather than the member state. Ian, do you think we're powerless in this?
No, we're not powerless. They're regulated here. Their headquarters are here. And I think we can take a significant stand. I mean, there's two things. One, we can take a stand in relation to tax, which we haven't done up until now, but broader regulation is required, and an acceptance, that they are in fact publishers. Paul Tweed, the media lawyer, did a podcast with us, with Sam Smith, a few weeks ago, and he made the point, and I think this really sums up the issue and the juxtaposition best, where he said, if I send a letter to the Irish Times and they publish it and it's defamatory, the Irish Times is on the hook because they've published it. If Facebook accepts that letter and puts it on their site, they're saying it's nothing to do with us. So there's double standards that needs to be addressed. But there will be European legislation, but Ireland, where they are regulated and where they've incorporated their European headquarters, we have significant influence on this, and we should be using that influence.
Slight shift in emphasis here. We'll come back to this. John Doyle, thanks for this question. He appreciates the insights. He wants to know if the panel think with vaccines becoming a more realistic prospect, have the panel discerned any improvement in confidence for 2021? Tom, maybe you want to take that?
I have to, I think, the Trump's exit, Biden and the arrival of Biden combined with the positive news on vaccines, it's definitely a bit of a spring in people's step, a little bit, but I think I think that we're feeling it a little bit. I can certainly see it in membership numbers are on the rise versus say the first week of lockdown, where it's like bump. And I think that you can feel that optimism is still quite small, as we don't know, we don't see people using them. So people aren't 100% sure in terms of effectiveness, how quickly it'll roll out. There's still a lot of unanswered questions, but I think there's definitely more of a positive mood, Connor. And I think that's really going to take off next year if we can get any sort of a swing and see the vaccines being rolled out and see the numbers declining right across the world. And you combine that with, somebody who seems mentally stable in charge of North America, such an important partner of Ireland's and player in the world, that you very often see in these situations, it gets to its worst point in the next 2021, it could turn out to be a very good year for Irish business and for business in general.
Loda?
Yeah, and I think it's such an interesting kind of topic at the minute, because there is this kind of cautious optimism. I find it hard, to know, I suppose for me, success will be when I can have 900 people in the Old Burlow celebrating Businesswoman of the Year Awards event. And that says to me that COVID is gone and the vaccine has worked. And to get from my kitchen to there, and I think it's November 25th we had, and it's our anniversary date of the Businesswoman of the Year Awards last year, 14 years in existence. And I find it difficult to bridge that gap as to how and when we'll get there, when Christmas is coming and we probably won't get into our restaurants to, have our vino, and maybe we will, maybe we'll go outside, we won't have the pints in the pub, we see the family. So I find it hard to connect as to when COVID will be completely gone. And also I think what will be interesting is if, as Tom says, 2021 is that good year and it's completely, it's wiped out, the vaccine has worked, will we all race back to our events and getting out, and will we enjoy that, or will we have learned to actually be kind of like the balance, and will our teams and our staff want to kind of have the mix of remote and the office? So there's lots more to come.
Yeah, there's another one here for you actually, which is interesting. In fact, a lot of people are onto the behavioral point, but maybe, Clodagh, just sticking with you for a sec, regarding changes mentioned, and this is from Patricia Cusack, earlier, in terms of journalists not in the office, not able to bump into people, less in-person opportunities. How do you see relationship with PR agencies changing? And what would be your preferred approach for an agency to get their client in front of you?
Yeah, and I think that's the difficulty. And actually, I had this conversation with one of my editors this morning, and we were just discussing that, when we'll all be back. And we imagine that the first thing that'll happen is there'll be a flurry of press releases in and a flurry of events, and everyone will be running into town, what are the new launches, all that kind of stuff. And I think we enjoy that, and we love that side of it. So we'll welcome all that when it comes back. But at the moment, it is difficult for a brand to get in front. Now, most media houses are fully supporting Irish for Christmas. And I know that our goodwill is there as a publisher to support Irish brands. So I would welcome, and on behalf of Image Media, I would say, drop a line to me. We will filter out to the team. We very much are trying to champion and get behind all businesses right now. It is difficult to set up Zooms and get your face-to-face, but all I can say to the Image is, yeah, we're behind you. So,
Ian, thanks for that, Clodagh. Ian, tell me what you, a couple of pieces you admired. I mean, I think some of the stuff in the currency, that's a given, has been remarkable. But otherwise, what, you know, things have you seen that you thought,
I tell you who has really impressed me. And sometimes it's, and you're right, you look to The Economist and you see what people are doing internationally. I think the Farmers Journal have been absolutely brilliant through this crisis. And it's a publication I've long admired. It's unlike most media publications, it's always made money. Its circulation goes up and not down. But if you look at how they responded to the crisis, right, now they know their audience really well. So they set up an online mart system. So you could buy and sell livestock through the Farmers Journal, through their app. You could buy machinery. They were trying to come up with different ways. And then also they use their online service and to try and facilitate farmers who were living alone. They will be engaged and talk to another farmer or another person. I think what they have done in terms of creating a sense of community beyond the stories, and the stories are great because they know their market really well, but how they've used digital to engage with their readers has been world class. Like people say, oh, we put up a story, we did this. You could literally sell your cow on the Farmers Journal website through a really good platform. And I just think, I think at times we don't realize how good that product is. That product is world class. Brilliant. So I really would, you know, look, I subscribe to it because I really appreciate some of the stuff they do around agribusiness. But if you're a farmer, that is essential reading. And I think they really stepped up to the plate during this crisis.
Fantastic, yeah. It's a community-based. Tom, you must have spotted a couple of winners.
I thought like the responses, the team in Second Captains, who are, you know, sports podcasters. As you know, Connor, like, you know, we write about business, you deal with business people. Business slowed, but it didn't stop. There were still deals in certain sectors being done. There was people restructuring, there's people getting advice. Look at sport. It literally stopped for quite a period of time. And I thought that they were inspiring how, you know, they launched a new podcast with comedian David O'Doherty. They looked back into the archives of sporting greats, and you're like, oh, okay, they're doing okay. But then they came out with, you know, in conjunction with the BBC, they came out with a podcast about George Gibney, looking at this guy who was, you know, a former sports trainer, you know, who took people to the Olympics, but who was also a pedophile. And I did think that was like, talk about a response to the crisis, come out with a story that puts your brand on the global stage. Now, the BBC definitely helped them do it, but they really invested in this product, and I was really impressed by that. And then two, once sports started getting going again, they were able to produce their broadcast entirely remotely, and that the quality and the sound quality was perfect. And I just thought that, like, for, you know, they'd be similar to us in that they're, you know, a small business, journalist led, that their response was absolutely fantastic.
There's a question here from thanks Tom, and so I will come back to your preferred piece in a sec, but there's one here. Do you think Irish readers have a reticence to paying for content behind a paywall more so than other nationalities, and still prefer going to a shop, having a browse, and then buying?
It's actually a longer term cultural thing. So if you grew up in the Benelux countries or in Germany, you bought your newspaper, but it got delivered to your house. So you bought an annual subscription to a newspaper. So they're much more comfortable with the idea of a subscription service, even if you were getting it delivered in physical format. So Ireland was undersubscribed in terms of subscriptions for a long time. I think that's changing. I really do. I think the arrival of Netflix, Amazon Prime, and all these things, people are now much more accustomed to paying for a service. And I really think that's the future of media, is that sort of sustainable subscription model.
Yeah, and then a question here is, same from Michael Doherty, our magazines, you know, there's so much available and free. Are magazines being able to charge for digital editions, and are people buying them?
I think I'll let Clodagh come in a second.
Yeah.
But this was one of the things I chair the RT guide, and like it's really held up this year. People have continued to buy it. The advertising, people have continued to buy it. The Christmas edition looks very strong. I think you'll always have people gravitating towards a product that they like and know, and that tactile sense that Clodagh mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point for us because, you know, I suppose this pandemic, you know, accelerated our vision for image and the future, and to future-proof the sustainability of the brand. And so we are currently developing our new site, which will have paywalled content on it.
Okay.
And for female content, which is so accessible and so free, what's, you know, crystal clear to us is that people want good content. So we're going to set off on that trajectory, and I suppose, which ultimately is our shift now, is to become, you know, less reliant on advertising and more reliant on readers. So talk to me in a year and I'll tell you how all that's going.
Okay, we'll do that. I hope that we might be invited back by Liam. But Tom, one here, how much truth are people willing to hear? At what point do you pull back on a story because you don't think your audience can handle the full truth?
Well, that's a good question. I always say, like, the truth should be your North Star in journalism, and that no matter what pressures, and, you know, I've come under pressure from some media owners, not yourself, Connor, I hasten to add,
Out of that business.
you know, to point a story in a particular direction towards, you know, one of their enemies, or, you know, not report about their particular embroglios, I suppose. So I have seen that. So I think that, like, as a journalist, if you're to stay credible and maintain your long-term integrity, you got to go towards the truth. The one thing, though, that I think that, and maybe the questioner is getting to, is this issue of COVID-19 and are we overreacting and this type of stuff. We're definitely seeing, you know, some business people think that we are, and that the price we're paying the price of the cure isn't worth it. So if that's what the questioner is trying to get to, like, yeah, I would be conscious that, like, you know, neither myself or Ian are doctors, epidemiologists. Now, I know Twitter is full of these people who consider themselves as such. It is very hard to know on that one big story, the biggest story of our time, have we got the balance right?
I'm going to ask a final question, Clodagh. Immediately after Tom answers this, you jump in with your favorite piece for the last 6 months. But Tom, the question is, are you concerned about the financial pressure, the financial and social media competition pressures, which means stories have to be turned around so quickly? I have a particular pet hate for typographical errors. And and it does happen increasingly. But I mean, do you think more seriously that without checking in a couple of words, what do you think? Is it harder for you to get, you know, stuff checked, both for factual accuracy and for cleanliness of presentation?
Well, we definitely set up the currency because we were sick of doing that type of stuff. That we were not going to do that, and we saw that the market doesn't want it, the quick turnaround story. Like, I'd done that in my radio station days, I'd done it in my independent news and media days and you figure
what
out
about elsewhere, places like the Irish Times and the Independent and others?
Look, nobody's going to pay for it, and everyone is chasing the same story. But I do think it does lead to, definitely leads to mistakes, and it leads to, you know, errors creeping into the media, and that isn't good for anyone if people start to lose trust in the main Irish media brands.
Gotcha. Clodagh.
I have a favorite piece. I just want to say that the person who has provided me with the most information that I can keep moving throughout this whole entire COVID has been Gavin Riley, Virgin Media political correspondent. And I'm just going to say that, like, I have followed him every day, and he's always succinct, gives me the news. I don't have to watch it. So I'm going to give him my thumbs up.
Thumbs up.
Yeah.
Fantastic, everybody. I'm going to hand it back to Michael.
Thank you, Connor, and thank you again, Clodagh, Ian, and Tom, for giving your time and expertise today. It's just been absolutely fantastic having you here. Before we close up this webinar for the day, I just have a few things to say. First of all, once again, thank you to our speakers, and thank you also to the Trinity Business Alumni, in particular Liam Booth, as well as the crew here at Trinity Development and Alumni who have helped put this webinar together, in particular Alexandra Owens. And lastly, I'd like to thank everyone who tuned in today and for your enthusiastic engagement sending through all of those questions. It was really great to hear that discussion come from those questions and comments. On the screen there, you'll see links to both image.ie and thecurrency.news, as well as keycapital.ie. I highly recommend you bookmark these links and visit regularly. If any questions occur to you over the next couple of days following on from this webinar, we will be sending a follow-up email soon, and I would encourage you to reply to that email with your questions, which can hopefully then be passed along. On the screen as well, you'll see a link to the Trinity Business Alumni's website, tba.ie, where you can join the TBA network and stay up to date with events such as this one, as well as news throughout the year. They also have a LinkedIn group that I would encourage you to join as well for updates too. If you have any more general questions or comments concerning the webinar series, you can always email us at alumni@tcd.ie. We're always happy to hear from you. And finally, as I mentioned in the beginning, this is our final Inspiring Ideas at Trinity webinar for 2020, and it has been an absolute pleasure being involved in this series. And from everyone at Trinity Development and Alumni, thank you so much for tuning in throughout the year, for asking questions, and for giving feedback and helping to keep the spirit of the Trinity community alive and well during this most challenging of years. We hope to welcome you again next time in the new year. And in the meantime, thank you again to our speakers. Thank you for joining us, and stay safe.